Howdy everybody. So I wanted to give you an update here. I cleaned my lens. Always seems to be the last minute thing I think of. But I made it safely to Freightliner. I'm right across the street from Freightliner at this little truck stop. And before I got here, the last time I started a truck, all fault codes are clear. There's no maintenance indicator light. There's no evidence of any fault codes whatsoever. So this was the ACM, that fault code cleared. So I'll just show you this here in a second. No faults detected. So, there's no check engine light, there's no maintenance indicator light, the truck did not derate. I got up to 70 miles an hour on the way here. I only had to go 5 miles. So all indications are there's nothing wrong with the truck. But we know that's not true. This is always the battle I have with Freightliner, especially this Freightliner. This is Northwest Freightliner. And these are the same people that gave me trouble 3 years ago with the EGR valve actuator on my old truck. They couldn't find anything wrong, so they hooked up the laptop, cleared fault codes, gave it back to me, sent me on my way. Never fixed the damn thing. It charged me $600. And then as soon as I got 30 minutes down the road, the fault code reappeared. So here it is. I'm at Northwest Freightliner. Now this is a different location, but what I want them to do is be proactive. I'm going to say, look, I had a fault code and I seem to resolved it myself, but that doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. The problem very much does exist. What we want to do is go ahead and replace the DEF doser valve, because we know we've isolated the problem to that part. And just because I did a temporary fix doesn't mean it's not going to come back again. It is going to come back again. That wire harness will fill up with fluid again at some point, and this problem, this fault code, is going to come up again. When it's going to come up, nobody knows. And what are you going to do as a preventative maintenance measure once a day? Take apart your fairing and pull that harness off and dump water out and let it dry. That's the only way to prevent it from coming back again. I think the better way to do it is you're at Freightliner, you're in the Rocky Mountains, the truck is throwing fault codes. Even though everything's cleared right now, the best thing to do would be go ahead and replace that DEF doser valve, so that you can eliminate that altogether. So, we're, in some ways, because of this type of Freightliner, they don't work on vehicles that don't have fault codes. I know it sounds strange, but it's one of those things where if they tell me, look, there's no fault code, so we can't diagnose your truck and we don't want to change parts needlessly, then I would probably, as a minimum, would purchase the part from them and carry it in my truck. I would also look to purchase the socket set, because it takes a E-Torx socket, special star-shaped socket that I don't have. There's 3 bolts and they require that special socket. So I would request the part and see if they have the socket set. And if they don't have the socket set, then find a place that has it on my travels. I think the worst case scenario would be is they tell you they're not going to do it, but they're willing to sell you the part. Carry the part with you, and if the problem reoccurs, you can either do it yourself if you have the socket set, or you call a mobile mechanic and tell them you have the part. You just need the mechanic to change the part for you. So that just did the engine idling shut off timeout. So my technical skills have improved greatly over the years. I did get a lot of help from a mechanic in the DD15 group who really, he took a lot of time showing me how to check that. But you can see there's no fault codes, none whatsoever. There's no derate. There's no restriction in power or speed. My speed got up there. I don't know about power, but there's nothing in here that says there's a fault code of any kind. Active alerts, none. So, what really happened is that I drained the fluid out of the wire harness, and then I let it dry all night. And then I started truck up the next day, and I had the derate code. I even had a code that derated me all the way down to 5 miles per hour. It did a regen on its own as part of the opti-idle, and it cleared active faults, but the maintenance indicator light stayed on and the fault history stayed there. Well, over the course of the day, it opti-idled 2 or 3 times, full cycles. I just let it do its thing, and right before I came to Freightliner, it cleared everything. I mean, it's just like everything cleared, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to make it here without having to do 5 miles per hour. I did 65. I had set the cruise on 65. You could go all the way up to 70, but there's no derate, no reduction in speed. So Freightliner is right there. That's their sign right there. That's the Freightliner sign. So they open at 7 a.m. So we'll go over there and talk to those guys. They could say stuff like, well, we're busy, can't get to your truck for a week, this, that, and the other. It's like, give me the part. It's one of those things where the delay is more expensive than getting the part and hiring a mobile mechanic if needed. This problem pretty much could have been here for quite some time, based on the amount of fluid that was in that wire harness. That def doser valve could have been leaking for a significant amount of time, and it could be a pinhole leak, which means that it could take a long time for enough moisture and fluid to accumulate to the point where it would throw a fault code. That being the case, now that it's dry, and starting over, it could take a while before it accumulates again to the point where it throws a fault code. So these are different strategies I have to think about based upon the availability of Freightliner and the mechanics, and if they're willing to work with me to change that part based on what I tell them. So if they don't want to do it, then I'll just buy the part myself and carry it in the truck, and if we have another breakdown, call a mobile mechanic and have them change the part for me. Another solution would be is, if we were fortunate in some regards, carry the part, get routed to Interstate Power Systems and have them do it. But they're like 2,000 miles away, 1,500, 2,000 miles away. They probably have another location other than Lincoln that's closer. There's other Detroit diesel shops that, besides Interstate Power Systems, I could go to. So, it's one of these tricky breakdowns where, the good news is the fault code's cleared and you pretty much know where the problem is isolated. Bad news is Freightliner doesn't know how to solve a problem without a fault code. And when you say, well, let's change the part, they get that monkey face on, and they don't want to do it. Or they'll say, well, we could put you in a queue. It'll be a week, 2 weeks. I have no idea. And so now the truck is running fine, the fault code's cleared. I may just buy the part and then go from there. It's hard to say, so we'll take it one step at a time. We'll check with Freightliner in the morning and then see what they have to say. But you know, it's good that the fault code's cleared, but it's also problematic because Freightliner can't fix something that doesn't have fault code. You know, this particular Freightliner dealership, Northwest Freightliner, they can't fix it. They don't have fault code. That's why I had a problem 3 years ago with the EGR actuator. It was throwing fault codes, and I went into the dealership in Medford, Oregon. It's the Northwest Freightliner, same dealership, different location. They didn't fix it. I told them what the fault codes I was having. They hooked up the computer and said, we can't find nothing. They released the truck back to you and said, we can't fix it without, if it's not throwing fault codes, we can't fix it. So for them, they had to have an active fault code in order to work on your truck. Otherwise, they weren't going to work on it. So that's the scenario that I could incur tomorrow. Is I say, hey, I would like to replace the def doser valve. And they said, well, you don't have any active fault codes. You know, it's like, well, if I drive 100 miles, I might. You know, so, but, you know, it's one of those things where, from what my research says, it's not hard to do to replace it. I think, you know, get the part would probably be, you know, if you can't get it fixed by Freightliner, get the part if they have it in stock. They should have it in stock. And then carry it with you. And then if you have other problems, you know, at least you have the part. You can always hire a mechanic. All right, guys, that's all I got for you.